Hi, my name is Ajna, and today I'll be talking about low-income housing. You should care about low-income housing because it could be affecting the current neighborhood that you live in, or it could affect your neighborhood in the future. The argument that I will be discussing tonight is that low-income housing has a negative effect on neighborhoods in the United States. Before I get into my claims, I want to just clarify a few definitions. The first is affordable housing. The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development defines affordable housing as being, in general, housing for which the occupants is or are paying no more than 30% of his or her income for gross housing costs, including utilities. I also want to clarify low-income housing, which is generically any housing that is limited to occupancy by persons whose family income does not exceed certain preset levels. So essentially, these two terms are often interchangeable. I just also wanted to quickly clarify undesirable, which in this case is not wanted, and hotspot, which is a concentrated area in which something frequently occurs. The two claims that I'll be using to support my argument are that affordable housing makes areas undesirable to live in, and that affordable housing creates an unsafe environment. Affordable housing makes areas undesirable to live in because affordable housing units often need repair, but local governments do not have the funds to do so. These housing units often need repair because of the high crime rates, and in 2014, a criminal victimization study by the Bureau of Justice found that about 11% of people living within low-income housing were victims of violent crime. This violent crime causes a lot of damage to housing units, and because of the mass quantity of the different units within each development, local governments do not have the money to support it. Affordable housing also causes the value of surrounding homes to drop. Two Stanford graduate students found that low-income housing built in slightly wealthier neighborhoods results in large losses for the neighborhood. In their study, the neighborhood that they used for the study lost $17 million in value in the first year, and within 10 years, that decrease in value spread across surrounding neighborhoods. And also for that, a Brown University study found that low-income housing developments on average lowered the neighborhood value by about 5%. Affordable housing units also make areas undesirable to live in because affordable housing often takes down parks or other old functional buildings to create space for construction. And a study by Harvard shows that the removal effect often occurs with these housing units, and this effect is when desirable uses like parks or older functional buildings are removed to build these. Affordable housing also often leads to overpopulation, which can lead to overpopulated schools and can also strain the local police department. My second claim to support my argument is that affordable housing creates an unsafe environment. Affordable housing creates an unsafe environment because affordable housing creates hotspots of violent crime. Excuse me. According to a U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, a study they did in the summer of 2016, crime in neighborhoods often occur in a few highly concentrated areas, and these can be attributed to the low-income housing units. These are called hotspots. My second point for this claim is that when people grow up around violent crime, it makes them perceive it as normal, consequently creating a cycle of crime. According to Friedson and Sharkley, who are NYU professors, this is completely preventable by spending money on nonviolence youth programs instead of on low-income housing units. My last point for why affordable housing creates an unsafe environment is because affordable housing promotes racial and ethnic segregation, and segregated areas, on average, have more violent crime. In summary, low-income housing developments should not be built because they decrease the value of neighborhoods, they lead to overpopulation, and they breed violent forms of crime.
Don't stand there, please. Go sit down. All right, the proposition was identified, so that's good. The justification that you give at the beginning, I think, needs a little bit more context. You're basically just saying it's important because, gee, someday you might be living in a house. That seems a little abstract. The secondary claims, you previewed 2 secondary claims, which sounded fine, but in the body of the speech and in the summary, it sounds like you have 3 issues that you're talking about. You didn't really develop much on one of those points, so I think it's really supposed to be part of the second issue. So that's a little bit of confusion in the body of the speech when it comes to the supporting issues. You explained the underlying principles for the most part. I think that we understand that. And you have a tendency to have at least one piece of evidence on the argument. Sometimes there's a little bit more. However, sometimes the evidence is a little bit conclusionary. Like there's this one quote that you have at the end that says, oh, if we spent the money on youth programs instead of affordable housing, we'd eliminate this problem. And that's based on what? That's a very conclusionary statement. I thought that was a little bit problematic. The research and the studies on the first point talking about the value of housing I thought were pretty straightforward. That's some good statistical information, and I think it's understandable. It's not that hard to explain. The last point where you're talking about racial segregation that's going on, that's all asserted. That's one of the places where I didn't think there was any information. And it was also, like I said, it sounded like it was a third point, but I think it's really supposed to be part of the second point. You have a tendency to read a lot, and you're reading fast. You've got plenty of time. You could take your time a little bit more and explain these things and try to connect with the audience more. I think that would help your ethos. All right, thank you.